subject that's been pulling at my heartstrings for a long time. Feels extra special. And medical gaslighting is something that's rarely talked about, little known about. So when I heard Juliet say we have a chat about it, I thought, well, I could if that's what people want to, but I had prepared it more as a presentation because the knowledge is so low that I think you need to know more about it first before a real conversation can be had. But I just want to check if that's how you see it.
Yeah.
Okay. So I realise that the time is very short and it's a subject that is very broad and very deep, and I struggled with how am I going to deal with that? What do I really want to get across and how can I do that in a compact way? And I realise actually I've got something already that I can use for that. The disadvantage of doing that, making it so compact, is that it is very, very raw. So I feel it needs to come with one of those trigger warnings that some television programmes come with. But this was written during COVID time when I was in hospital because there was beds free because there was lots of operations were being cancelled. So in rehabilitation hospitals there was room for people like me, and I was admitted, and a psychologist suggested that I should formulate a letter directed at the people that had caused me the harm that I'm talking about, the medical gaslighting. And I was first not very happy to do that because I said, I don't want to waste my time. I'm never going to convince those people anyway. They've made that very clear. I'm the problem. I'd rather look forward, change things towards the future for myself and for others. And she was, but that's what we're doing. We're not you're not writing a letter to them to try and convince them of anything new. What you're doing is writing it for yourself, but directed at them. And focus on three things. What was it they did? What was the effect of it on you? And what could they have done instead? And remembering that letter, I thought, well, actually, those are the things that I want to put across. So I would like to read it in full. It is a very painful thing to hear, I assume. It's certainly a very painful thing to have written and to read through every time. But I have made good use of it, and I will tell you of that afterwards. I've moved forward from the anger and the bitterness that's very much in there. So I'd ask you not just to bear with me, but to actually go through it with me, if you can. To Dr. J, A, and other colleagues, therapist in Y, several hospital professionals in G, social worker in G, head of home care in B, and various home care workers. I could start this letter with the word dear, as I ought to, but that would be a lie. My regard for each of you has declined in line with the disdain you showed me. Also, I might have written to each of you individually. When it comes to it, each of you made different mistakes towards me, each within their own context. However, they are only variations on the same theme. Your professional conduct towards someone with a diagnosis you look down upon. This immediately points to my first question and reproach addressed to you. After having heard often enough how I imagined my symptoms, how I used them as a symbol towards my friends, or to compensate for the lack of attention I suffered as a child, and so on, I learned to ask the question whether that made me any less ill. If I had imagined all of this, if my condition had been purely psychosomatic, would that have denied me the right to any respect and genuine care? That's definitely how your attitude towards me and fellow people diagnosed with ME/CFS seemed. Each of the examples I give here came to me directly from one of you. As long as I resisted, I would never heal. So you advised. You were right. Since then, it has come to light that I have a genetically transmitted condition, Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. The best I can expect is to learn to live with it, also according to professional advice. To what extent that relates to resisting nonsense, I still wonder. I can hear you calling the diagnosis into doubt. ME CFS patients are the kind of people who will hop from doctor to doctor until they find some kind of acknowledgement they can hide behind. I can tell you that the discovery was initially made in the genetic department of a university hospital and later on confirmed twice in another. That would appear to be pretty reliable, wouldn't it? It's best not to perform further investigations on ME CFS patients, as something will always be found, is what I heard. Indeed, I spent years with pain that was dismissed under that heading. I was given painkillers and antidepressants, something natural every now and again, and ample sick leave whenever I indicated the need. It was an endocrinologist who finally ordered an MRI for my back. This was entirely outside his domain, but he was the only one prepared to care. On the basis of the results, the neurosurgeon saw the need for 2 operations. The vertebrae was stuck bone to bone. The pain I was complaining of was more than warranted, he said. I learned from you that I had to be able to justify everything I said, every emotion, every thought, every decision. When I finally succeeded in analysing and correcting myself, you felt that got in the way. I should leave all that behind and follow your lead. I was expected to offer you blind trust when you had repeatedly trampled over every agreement we had made. My bitterness and anger ooze from this letter. And I can imagine that that diminishes your willingness to accept what I am saying drastically. In your eyes, I most likely remain someone who once had an ME CFS diagnosis, proving its accuracy with this very piece of writing. The more, the better, and the stronger the arguments are that a patient can bring to the table to discount allegations that they are in denial, the stronger the proof that they're in denial. I've always had the grit to question myself. When you implied that a fault in the way I felt and thought might be the root cause of my perpetual exhaustion and pain, I was prepared to examine myself closely. I learnt a lot by doing that, for which I'm grateful. What this internal search also left me with is doubt around how genuine anything I feel can ever be. These days I'm advised to listen to my body, but you taught me that this was led by my psyche, that what was there, that was where I had to mend it, and most importantly, that I should invest as little time and effort as possible in my body's attention-seeking tendencies. When something goes wrong, I wonder whether I should mention it, whether I should ask for help, let alone request investigation and treatment. Even when my husband is driving me to the accident and emergency department, or when strangers call an ambulance for me, I am concerned the conclusion will be that this was an extremely exaggerated response. What if everything turns out to be fine? That is the question that gets the upper hand with every injury, every torn muscle, every asthma attack, every kidney stone, every hernia, however much proof I have gathered that my instinctive estimations are usually correct. This whole process, which causes depletion and delay, involves risks. In addition, I initially distrust any doctor or therapist new to me. And despite being able to overcome that rapidly, I remain alert. Again, time and energy are lost Yet I have experienced significantly more respect, care, and understanding since a collection of diagnoses explain all of my physical symptoms. It's as if now I finally deserve it. What requirements should I have met to have been worthy of yours? Your intervention might have been more positive and more efficient had you taught me some energy-saving strategies. Privately, this also goes beyond this. My husband often feels frustrated, angry, and helpless at the high demands I place on myself. And what kind of example am I setting for my son, our son, who shares a few of my diagnoses? When it appeared that credible reasons could be found for the problems I had been reporting for over 20 years, I found this difficult. A friend pointed out that I would rather believe the psychosomatic explanation because it gave me a sense of control. If I could find the switch in my mind that could ensure my health, I would do anything to flick it. That is how it is. The image each of you drew, fed, and strengthened dominates the process of acceptance I am confronted with continually. You said my sense of loss and request for grief work was totally unjustified. If I had had AIDS or something like that, yes, then I still struggle to allow myself the right to mourn everything my lack of health has taken away from me. Meanwhile, for several years, the notion of self-compassion has been put to me. I suspect it may be easier for me to pick up had your approach been different. Stronger still, perhaps this would achieve better results even in purely psychosomatic cases. Only your logic prescribed that providing people who had an ME/CFS diagnosis any aids or adaptations was foolish, since they love being dependent so much. A minimum of respect, a bit of openness, and willingness to listen would have made a huge difference. The courage to question the fact that you were right might have achieved a better result. My quality of life with and after this diagnosis, which turned out to be wrong, could have been much higher had you fulfilled your role with a sense of warmth, humanity, and dedication. Instead, you caused permanent harm. I can hear your answer that I interpret any such damage as everlasting, due to my own weakness, my lack of volition to overcome this and go forward. I guess you're right. I understand that that is very important to you. So that's what I wrote. After reading it to the psychologist who encouraged me to write it, and discussing it with her, I came to the realization finally that most of the people that this was directed at were actually acting in good faith. They truly believed what they told her. And they thought if I jumped on board and did as they directed, I would heal. I can live with that. It made me realize instead of them being in my mind, it was all in theirs. It was what they were taught, what they are still taught, sadly, but it's also what society at large accepts. And therein lies my plea to you as Quakers, who tend to live faith in action. Quakers who speak up against injustice, and this is injustice. Many patients continue to suffer. Most are too ill and too ashamed to raise their voice. And I don't say that blindly. I get their emails these days, having written the book. I get their plea to be their voice. Aside from writing my book detailing my own story, I've gathered a wealth of testimonies from other patients, which is too much to cover here, of course, in a short space of time. But most of them request to stay anonymous if they were to use theirs anyway, because of the shame and the guilt that has been induced in us. But how are any of you to know that this goes on if we don't speak up? Let alone know what effect it has. What could possibly move you into any action, and how would you know which action to take? I personally have had an enormous amount of support from friends who provided practical, emotional and even financial help to improve not just my quality of life but that of my husband and of our son as well. I am extremely grateful for that. I always will be. Of course I will. We've been extremely well looked after. So what am I complaining about? How can I expect more? I'd like to liken it to another situation, this similar and yet very similar. Would you consider feminism to show a lack of gratitude to the men who did provide good care to women over the years? So what I am asking for myself, but also for a number of fellow patients who have asked and encouraged me to speak for them. Do we want you to get angry on our behalf? Perhaps just enough to help effect change. Explicit anger is much less likely to do that, as peaceful Quakers know all too well. In any case, though the negative effects of medical gaslighting are long-lasting and severe, as I said, I doubt the intention was to cause that. So let's meet where that went wrong. Let's see what we can do to prevent that from happening in the future. When we bump into someone and might hurt them by doing so, we're quick to say, I'm sorry. Much less so when we cause emotional pain. Let's make that easier. All three of the psychologists I read the letter to had the same reaction. They sat with me, quietly, shocked that this can and did happen. They showed their belief and their care. They almost appeared embarrassed in the way their colleagues before them had treated me. It was the most healing experience they could have provided. I've also presented it to other professionals at the start of new therapeutic relationships, asking them to read it before embarking on any further discussion. I use it to explain that I'm damaged goods as a patient, I'm likely to get triggered easily and overreact. I'm aware of that. And I ask them to be too. So that together we can find middle ground and a way to communicating effectively. And so far that's proved amazingly successful and very fast. I understand how astonishingly easy it is to fall into the trap of medically gaslighting someone with chronic, rare, barely visible and fluctuating conditions. Chronic, the patient keeps coming back, keeps complaining about the same symptoms despite the best care you can think of, the best advice you can think of. It must be them doing it wrong. Rare. Causes are less obvious, the conditions are less known about, it requires thinking outside the box, or an admission not to know. People in the caring professions are put in a position of authority. They are supposed to know. Admitting that you don't can be extremely difficult and make you very vulnerable in that position. And yet, It is what people with those conditions are asking for unanimously. Just tell us you don't know, and that you will give us the best aid you think on while we find out. Or we might never find out, but respect who I am, not knowing. Barely visible and or fluctuating. I sit here with several people today and have told me how well I look. And it's the human condition to generalise that. If you look like this now, you are like that virtually all the time. Yes, you'll be a bit tired sometimes. John can tell you otherwise. It's an optical illusion. I'm okay at the moment, partly because I've learned how to manage my conditions well enough now, thanks to the support of people in exactly the same professions as the ones that made the mistakes in the first place. Partly because the condition is fluctuating. Partly because people who have chronic illness learn to do that. See, if you're a relatively healthy person and you have an injury or have an infection, you hurt, you can afford to look like it, to sound like it. You can afford to behave badly for a few days and people will forgive you because they know who you are and how that will be different once you've healed. If you feel like that for decades, you can't afford to do that, or you end up alone, as many chronically ill patients do. It's very isolating. So we learn to mask. We learn to look like we're not in pain, like we're not ready to just fall down and fall asleep. Or not sleep, which is worse, actually, in those conditions. So, I understand and accept that that's what happens to people in the caring professions too. They're not expected to be perfect. If we can talk about those things in terms that are guilt and blame free for them too, and respectful to them too, the chances that they will listen will expand. But we do need to talk about it. And we do need people who are healthier and stronger than we are to speak up for us. We need a society in which it is implicitly and explicitly clear that the expectation is that every single patient gets treated with dignity and with respect. How would working towards that take anything away from the very many, very important causes that Quakers and others are already working towards?